Look, there's my new one. That's little Cammy Jr. But anyway, exciting. Frederick, Us, Radek, see Husaria Szczecin. Radek was the sponsor of the Polish seminar.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was very well organised. Good to see you, Radek. We had so much fun too, because then Radek came over to the seminar in Wales. But anyway, look, great to be back.
Yeah, welcome home.
Good to see you, yes.
You had, by the sounds of it, you had a trip of a lifetime.
It was indeed a bucket list trip, that's for sure. The seminars were fantastic. The whole objective of the tour was to do Kyokushin seminars in Tromsø, and then I did another one in Lørenskog, which is just outside Oslo.
So they're both in Norway? So
yes.
you did two in Norway?
Yes.
Yep.
Tromsø is way up north, and the host there, Shihan Blørn, it was just a fantastic seminar. Radek came up for that too. And we're, the first night, it's like 12:15 at midnight, and the sun's still out. So I said to him, "What time does the sun go down?" He said, "July 27th." And that was like June 3rd or something like that. Anyway, the seminar tour started really beautifully in Tromsø. Then I went down to Lørenskog. It was the dojo of Lørenskog Kyokushin, great school. But they're the ones that actually got me started with the seminars in Europe. And I did a number of years. Yes. Yeah. But then after Lørenskog, flew over to Poland. First time to Poland, went to Szczecin, which is where the dojo of the Husaria group is. That area, Szczecin's right on the German border, so there were times when it was part of Germany and it was liberated, I believe, after World War II. But also, Radek calls his karate group the Husaria group, and the Husar are the famous Polish infantry horsemen, who were legendary, and they didn't just figure in some of the wars of Europe; they were actually pivotal to the success of so many of the great wars of Europe, to the point where even the British horsemen named themselves the Hussars.
Wow.
Yeah, so absolutely incredible history, fantastic history. And then after Poland, the next seminar after that was in Wales. The seminars, the Kyokushin is alive and well. Each of the seminars had probably the smallest number of any seminar session, other than Oslo, because Oslo was actually just the one club, Lørenskog, so it was their one club, so it was a little smaller. But the main seminars were all 100 plus. Poland had 140.
Yeah, I just saw the Polish photo before, and it was unbelievable numbers. It's great fantastic to see.
And look, the standard of Kyokushin everywhere is really solid. So I was happy to see that. But it was also exciting to be able to introduce some of my own alternate viewpoints to things, you know.
Such as, just roughly?
Well, the whole idea of the 5 ranges.
Yep.
A lock is a block, as a blow is a throw, which is being used by different people in different places. I just think those principles, plus also one thing I did, I had a nice chat to Gary O'Neill recently, but also one thing I did is I started to introduce Gary's footwork, the Gary step.
Gary step. Which
no one in the world does better than Gary, but I started to introduce my own version of it, strung onto the end of our footwork. So the 5 ranges, introducing guys to not just the kick range and the punch range, but also the headbutt elbow, the stand-up grapple and the groundwork. It was a lot of fun. Yep. And it was very happily and very widely accepted by everyone. So really happy about that.
And so what'd you do to entertain yourself between the long breaks in the Kyokushin seminars?
Yeah, not a lot of entertainment. I'm a glutton for punishment. I went and sourced out some teachers that had been very creative in their approach to grappling, particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Some great teachers that I wanted to train with and visit. The first one being an Estonian teacher by the name of Priit Mihkelsen. And so I headed north to Estonia. If you don't know where that is, it's one of the Baltic states up in the Baltic Sea between Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. And I went up to Estonia for 4 days, trained at Priit school, a very, very interesting creative approach to grappling. And then he did a seminar in Cologne in Germany. So I went down to the Cologne seminar. And then I ended up in Salzburg. Forgotten how beautiful that place is. I haven't been to Salzburg since 1979.
Wow.
Yeah.
40-something years.
Yeah, so it was very beautiful. Back up to Estonia. I took part in a 5-day grappling camp. Some great training. Once again, Priit was one of the main teachers there, so I was able to consolidate some of the techniques that he was helping me with. It was fantastic.
So while you were over there, this training, you were also advancing yourself in ranges 4 and 5 by the sounds of it too.
Yeah, I wanted to, I needed to. I always, there's no end to it.
No.
It's a never-ending story. And I had fantastic opportunity to train with a lot of really good people. But the camp was fantastic. And then after the camp, I headed off to England, where I visited Braulio Estima's BJJ school in Birmingham.
So I don't know, I looked up Braulio Estima when you told me about him. He's quite a legend in grappling, fair to say.
Yeah, Braulio Estima is one of the legendary BJJ teachers. Everyone's heard of Roger Gracie. Braulio and Roger are very close friends.
And for those that don't know, you might want to explain who Roger Gracie is too.
Well, Roger Gracie's like, if you could imagine a Kyokushin fighter that won 3 or 4 world tournaments in a row. That's Roger Gracie. They call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time, the greatest BJJ gi grappler in history, 10 world titles. And all 10 titles he basically won from the same position that he learned in the first week of training. But he does say that he owes his success and these fundamentals to Braulio Estima because they grew up together through the ranks. And Braulio is as legendary in many respects. Braulio he said when I was there, he's off to Vegas, I think, next month to be inducted into the ADCC Hall of Fame. He's one of very few, if any, people other than him who have won some prestigious double.
The ADC, that's a peak grappling event in the world, right? Yeah.
Arguably the #1 grappling event in the world. And he's won the double. In other words, he won his weight division and the open weight division twice.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You're in good company.
Incredibly good company. And what an unbelievable guy who's just so kind, so accommodating, learned just a ton of stuff.
It's probably impossible to get in an hour, but what are 1 or 2 key things that you learned from there, even philosophically or just the way they were or something, that kind of thing from hanging out with those guys?
That's a good point. Let me just say, absolute shout out to Braulio, because Braulio Estima is first and foremost in love with the importance of passing on to the next generation. So he devotes his life to sharing his knowledge to people. Unbelievable. And that's his big thing in life is he really recognizes, not just in BJJ, but for us in karate as well, that we stand on the shoulders of those who went before us, and we have an obligation to pass that on to the next generation so it doesn't die. I think that's really valuable. And he was very kind and very open. Another funny thing was, over the years, I've refereed what do they call it, UFC, and especially IMAF, is the International MMA Federation for Amateurs, and the head referee is a guy named Mark Goddard. And I'd gotten to know Mark. I learned a lot off him. He was a mentor in terms of the refereeing. But at the IMAF events, what they do is they go for a week or so, and every day at the end of training, all the referees would get together and roll for a couple of hours. I did a lot of rolling with Mark, and I knew he was from Birmingham, so I contacted him. I said, I'm in Birmingham. You got time to catch up? He said, what are you doing in Birmingham? I said, I'm training with Braulio Estima. He goes, no way, that's my home school.
Wow.
And it turns out he's a black belt under Braulio Estima. So he came in and we trained together that day as well. And then I said to Braulio, look, I'm going to London. I'd love to catch up with Roger Gracie. Do you happen to know Roger Gracie? And he laughed. He said, we're best mates. So he rings Roger Gracie. So I turn up at Roger Gracie's school. He said, look, my school is your school. Make yourself welcome. And and a guy named Roberto Lima was there, and a couple of really interesting stories. Roger Gracie's father, Mauricio Gomez, he was there. And I was talking to Braulio and I said, back in around 1996, 95, I was in London. I was looking for a BJJ school, and the only school I could find was one at the famous judo center called the Budo Kwai. And he said, that's Mauricio Gomez. That was Roger's father, had that school.
That you trained with him?
Yeah, trained with him. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
Oh, man, imagine that.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then I look into Roger's school. This is the coolest story. I got to tell you this. I look into Roger's school, and there's a guy there named Roberto Lima. Okay. He's often known as Gordo, that's his nickname. In 1995 or 96, I'm not sure, when Carlos Gracie Jr. was invited to Australia by Pete DeBean to introduce Gracie Barra BJJ, his BJJ. Pete contacted me and asked me to organise the Queensland leg because there was no BJJ, there was just a couple of BJJ schools. And so in the process of that, Carlos Gracie Jr. and Marcio Feitosa, who's the head instructor of Gracie Barra, and Roberto Lima and Pete DeBean stayed at my house at Service Paradise. And I wasn't sure whether they'd remember. So anyway, I looked in, I thought, there's Roberto Lima. So I thought, I wonder if he remembers. Okay, now don't get me wrong. It sounds like I've been a smart aleck, but this is what happened. I stuck my head in, he looks up and he goes, Cameron, we were talking about you 2 days ago. I'm going, no, why? He said, well, we were saying how you're the guy that introduced the word us to BJJ.
Wow.
Because when we train with you in Brisbane, every time professor would do something or say something or scratch or turn, your students would go, us. And you go, okay, us, we're going to do this, us. And finally, Professor Carlos Gracie Jr. comes up and goes, what is this word, us? And I explained it to him. I said, well, us is, it means this, it's a Kyokushin thing. Okay. So anyway, a few years later, I was training with Professor Carlos at his headquarters in California. And he goes, okay, everybody line up. And they all go, us. And I looked over and he winked and smiled. So anyway, but I always believed that I kind of had an influence in introducing the word us in the BJJ. And Roberto Lima, he confirmed it. So I'm there with Mauricio Gomez, Roger Gracie. Don't like to not drop names, but they're all, and he's explaining to them that this is where the word us came in. Yeah, because of and also another thing he said is, we also never ever forgot your dojo. In the old days in Brisbane, you remember the Hangar Dojo?
Hangar, yeah, I lived there.
I think it's one of the most beautiful dojos in the world. And we had a dormitory upstairs where you used to live. And that could have been developed into a stunning, but we had little cubicles
where there was beds and a few bookshelves and things.
And we had kitchen and
table.
Relaxation area. And the live-in students, Uchideshi used to train there. And he said, we never forgot that. There was always our dream to have like that. And of course, Gracie Barra, the headquarters in Florianopolis in Brazil, have a beautiful dojo. And right next to it, they've built a more like a student accommodation with individual rooms that students can come from around the world and stay there. So you never know, maybe the Brisbane dojo.
It was based on what they saw at your
maybe,
dojo.
Yeah, but amazing. Anyway, it's so good to get that confirmation of Roberto Lima.
That's amazing, isn't it, how it spread?
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I got some great photos. So that was in London. In London, I was training with a guy named Professor, his name's Lucio Rodriguez. They call him Lagarto. By the way, Roberto Lima's even though his name's not too well known, he is the inventor of what is now known as the half guard.
Yes.
Yeah, he blew his knee out. He wanted to compete, couldn't use one of his legs, so he just lied on his side and worked with Professor Carlos, created the half guard, and won 3 world titles from that position. So incredible problem solving. Really nice guy. It was great to see them. Got some great pics. But also what happened was over time, I got to meet and train. And look, I have to also give a shout out to Jeff Wybrow, Shihan Jeff Wybrow, one of the Kyokushin legends of Kyokushin UK. He fought in the Second World Tournament, and I think some of his fights when he's 20, 21, 22 years old, when he fought in the Second World Tournament, in one of the quarterfinals, I think he fought a guy named Chuck Chisholm. Chuck Chisholm was this monstrous student, big, strong American student of Shigeru Oyama. And young Jeff Wybrow took him to 5 extensions and lost the decision, but won the fight. And he became legendary as a result of that. And Jeff Wybrow and I had just an absolute wonderful time together during my time in London. I was staying with him.
Oh, nice.
And we got on like a house on fire. We have more in common than people would believe. But it was just an absolute honour to stay with Jeff as well. They were so kind to me and made me feel so welcome. And, you know, that's what the martial arts is all about. The big thing that I loved about my trip was all the Kyokushin guys, the hardest, toughest guys, these national champions of Poland and guys everywhere, tough heart, and they're so kind and so welcoming. And the BJJ guys were no exception. The best guys in the world. Roger Gracie, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. He comes up, you're welcome, make yourself welcome at the school. So very exciting. And in London, I trained with Professor Legato, who is, at one time, the teacher of my coach here, Professor Guy Trestini at Surface Paradise, BJJ, Gracie Baja, BJJ. So, you know, one heck of a trip. So.
Sounds like an amazing trip.
Yes. But I did come home to very sad news. I've mentioned many times the great uncle, Jon Osvald. As you know, he's not my uncle, but I was honoured to be able to call him Uncle Gene. And Uncle Jon Osvald passed away just last week. And a shout out to my own coach, John Donoghue, who in 65, 70 years of training, Jon Osvald only graded 5 people to black belt, and John Donoghue was one of them. John lived in LA for 10 years, trained BJJ as well as trained with Jon Osvald. Gene has John's son in his book of techniques when he's a little baby, called it the diaper attack because they were shooting and he wet his diaper. But anyway, it was very, very sad to hear his passing. I can only imagine that someone like John Donoghue, he introduced me to Jon Osvald, so I only really had a chance to train with Gene on occasion, and when I'd be in LA, I'd ring him up. He goes, "Cameron, the wonder from down under, are you training tonight?" I said, "Well, I'm checking if you are." He says, "If you are, I am." You know, he'd always come and pick you up at the hotel, pick me up, and did some great, spent a lot of nice time with him. And I live on that. The memories of that are so strong. And look at John Donoghue, who spent 10 years in LA training with him. And John used to tell me where they'd go and train, and they'd go for the weekend up to his mountain cottage. He had
up to Gene's mountain.
Yeah, Gene had a training center with a mat and everything up at the mountains. And they go there and they train the whole weekend, 10, 12, 15 hours.
Wow.
You know. So shout out to John Donoghue and all of Gene's family, his wife Midge, and the kids. A real loss to the martial arts world. I did mention on my Facebook post when I interviewed Benny the Jet in about 1980 something. I said, you're everyone's heroes. Who's your hero? He said, there's only one man I'd bet my life, my wife, my daughter, and my Harley on in a fight, and that's Jon Osvald. And so that was the first time I'd heard of Gene's name.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
His experiences and his collection of skills, I guess. He was doing a lot of what's kind of happening now, decades ago, wasn't he?
Well, he had the first televised mixed martial arts fight in America in 1963. He fought a boxer and choked him out. But the big thing about Gene that a lot of people don't realize is when Muhammad Ali fought Antonio Inoki in Japan in 1976. Jean LeBell was the referee. And that was very cool. And the reason he was the referee was because he knew Muhammad Ali. See, Jean's mother was the first woman to be inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame because she managed the LA Coliseum, I think, where so many fights, professional wrestling fights and boxing matches were. And Muhammad Ali, as Cassius Clay, fought there. And so Jean LeBell learned to box from Sugar Ray Robinson and got to know Muhammad Ali. So when the fight came up, they couldn't work out a referee. Now, in Inoki's corner was the one and only Carl Gotch, one of the great catch wrestlers of all time. And Carl and Jean were contemporaries, and they'd fought more than once. I think Jean was one of the very few people who actually beat Carl Gotch. Yeah. So when it came to agreeing on a referee, it was a no-brainer that it was going to be Jean LeBell. And so he refereed that fight, which is very, very...
He's probably the only person in the world that could actually legitimately referee that fight at that time, maybe.
I think you're probably right. At the time, no one else. In 1976, no one else had that complete experience and to understand and to be able to referee.
The striking and the grappling,
right. Yeah. So amazing experience. Spent a lot of time talking about what went down at in Europe, but just so much good training, so many good people. It's always the good people that make the difference. And it was the efforts of Shihan Blørn in Tromsø, the boys from the Lørenskog Dojo in Oslo, Sensei Radek from the Husaria Karate Group in Poland, and Sensei Phil Sedgman and Shihan Mack in UK, who ran those seminars around Europe that were just absolutely fantastic. There you have it.
I had a quick question for you.
Yes.
What, you're over there, you have a big break between the seminars, and it'd be so easy to just enjoy Europe in summer. I mean, Europe in summer is just beautiful, and I'm sure you enjoyed little parts of it. But what drove you to go to camps, see these people, do all these things, work on these different ranges? Like, what drives you to do that? Because it's so easy to not do those things, but you train. I mean, just before this, you're training again, probably trained this morning as well. It's just, there's no stopping.
Yeah, it's funny. Someone in Europe asked me, we had a question and answer at one of the camps, and someone said, what motivates you to keep going? And it seemed like a really weird question, because I think if you love what you're doing, I genuinely love what you're doing, there's the need for motivation doesn't arise. It's like, for me, being part of the Kyokushin world in training is like eating and breathing and drinking water.
Yeah, just part of it.
It's just part of life. And so the notion of going to Europe and going somewhere and having an opportunity to train with some of the absolute greatest martial artists of all time. I mean, if you're a martial artist, why wouldn't you? You look at Soso when he was a young man, and I'm not a young man, but maybe that's the motivation. I'm running out of time. I don't have a lot of opportunities anymore to train with inspiring teachers. So to get to Europe and be able to train with the likes of Braulio Estima, Priit Mihkelsen, and so on is just a dream come true for a little kid, Yeah. It was like a kid in a toy shop.
Yeah.
It really was. And you forget how old you are, you roll. Well, you don't forget, you actually feel it. You do feel, particularly you feel the cardiovascular, I'm sure.
And the body probably doesn't recover like it once did.
That's the main thing, right?
Yeah.
Have you had to deal with situations for older athletes?
Yes, absolutely.
And what are some of the main physiological differences that they're faced with?
Well, mainly is the consistency. To be able to train consistently is when you're in your 20s and 30s, it's very easy. But as you get older, it's more of a challenge. You can usually go and do the intensity and even solid sessions, but to be able to back up solid sessions back to back to back becomes more of a challenge as a general rule. But we talked about it before, the compound interest or the compounding of good decisions, great decisions you've made in your life from you know, a young man, for example, avoiding alcohol, being cautious with your diet, looking after your sleep, training regularly, stretching regularly, all those things you've done, like compound interest, like the story in your book about the father who gave the son, was it $10,000 an hour, 1 cent every day, doubled for a month.
Yeah.
That compound interest for you is like, feels to me like it's paying off enormously because, yeah, I mean, we're all getting older, but you still seem to be able to do a lot.
Yeah, you still feel the age, don't
Yeah.
you? The recovery factors there, the joints, you know, they're seriously worn out. But I think one of the compound interest things, that's a good way to look at it, is that you learn to use your body in a more efficient way. You don't kid yourself that you're still 20. I always say you speak to someone, they're my age, at 64, and they go, well, how you try? I'm training better and harder now than I ever was. Well, all that says is
They didn't do much.
They didn't train hard because, you know, look, there's Paddy Pinto and even Rod and Brad Hansen, one of the greats of Australian Kyokushin. You ask any of these guys, they'll tell you how hard they used to train when they were in their 20s. And even if you wanted to, and Sensei Mike Clark, but that motivation, the need for motivation, doesn't really exist. It is what it is, and it's part of life. Yeah, and there's Rob Wall. Everybody can see Rob Wall's name.
Yeah, Rob's amazing.
I think Rob, I'm only guessing, but I'm guessing he's 80 now. And so Rob was training when I was a little kid as well, you know. And so that really, Rob, I can't even talk when Rob's around about old age and consistency because Rob's been there longer than all of us. Yeah, about that. Look, speaking of 1981, good on you, Rob. That's amazing. But back in 95, 96, when Carlos Gracie Jr., Marcio Feitosa, and Roberto Lima joined Peter Bean and stayed at the house. But that's a photo from back then. That's with Marcio Feitosa. He was 19. And after that, I think he went on to win 5 world BJJ titles. And he's now the head instructor. He was 19 there. He's now the head instructor of Gracie Barra in the world. So how about that for a little bit of
history?
It's
amazing. Well, great to appreciate you sharing those experiences too. Just an amazing experience.
It was. A shout out to everyone in Europe who made the trip so valuable, especially in Kyokushin, and not to forget Shihan Wybrow, who's a legend in his own right. And he was so hospitable during my stay in London. But also the seminar hosts all around Europe was fantastic. Guys, Mitch, great to be back.
Thank you.
From next week, we'll get back into the techniques. We've got the camp, the Seoul Kyokushin camp coming up in the first weekend of September down in Wollongong. Very excited to share a lot of the great techniques. And if you haven't signed up for that, get in touch with me. There's still an opportunity. It's going to be a fantastic camp. Appreciate you hanging in there. Just a couple of old blokes chatting away. But, you know, I hope you enjoyed it. And
well, you're passing on. You're doing exactly what those overseas seem to do.
I was very inspired by Braulio Estima, even though he's 20 years younger than me. That's where age doesn't matter. You know, the senpai kohai thing, age plays a factor. So he was very kind and respectful to me, but not for 1 second did I try to imagine that there's anything but respect for him for his achievements. And Frederick, I really enjoyed your company in Europe. I was just flicking through looking for photos. So everybody who sees Frederick's name, that's Frederick and me standing at the top of the Oslo Opera House. Us, Rachel, good to see you. That's us at the top of the Oslo Opera House. And Frederick was great company on our trip. This is a museum for a ship named the Fram. One day I'll talk about it, but in a nutshell, my good friend Anna and George, Anna Hetherington from out at Longreach, her uncle designed and built the Fram, and the Fram is the greatest ice-breaking ship ever built, and that's a museum for it. Most icebreakers, when they go through the ice, if they get stuck, they get crushed. And he was the one that came up with the design that if it got stuck, it would actually pop out until the ice melted and go back in again.
Wow.
So incredible that we were able to find that Fram museum. So I went there with Frederick. He had a great day. Us. Good to see everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your company. And good to see you back. We'll see you next week. Thanks for coming along. Us.